All right, now we're ready to make our effects map. I'm assuming that people have a knowledge of how to make effects maps in this video. If you've never done one before, there's a lot of moving parts, and I recommend that you take a look first at the two intro videos I made, just, a breakdown of how effects maps work. I'm not going to stop to explain all that stuff here. So we're going to set this as our input image. Again, remember the background is a pass-through, and it's going to allow us to do as many of these as we want. We're only going to do one here. And now I'm going to right-click on my effects map so I can edit it. And this is actually going to be super simple as far as maps go. I'm going to add node quadrant. If I do that, then I have to sort of hand draw all these noodles. A quicker way, if you just want it to just do this, is if you've got a node highlighted, if you use the space bar, it'll actually hook those up for you. I mean, you don't always want it like that, but if you do, it's a quicker way of doing it. So we're going to first set our pattern input, which is going to be our input image, and there we go. We've got 4 in each quadrant, which is what we told it to do here. And then we're going to create functions for the offset, for the size, and the rotation. Before we do that, let's hop back here and set up our two inputs. If we go back to our lava here, there's two, well, there's going to be a third thing going on later, but right now there's two speeds, there's two things going on here, and this is sort of to do with well, one of them is to do with this map. And this map that we're building right now, we're going to be dealing with the crust speed, and that translates to how quickly those areas move around themselves. The magma speed, which we're going to get to later, actually just talks about how quickly this other stuff, the orange stuff, actually wiggles around. The lava lamp effect on the orange areas. So let's go ahead and make these two input parameters now before we start making the functions on our effects map, because it'll just make life easier later. So let's make crust speed. Again, I'm going to copy this. I know it's going to make that underscore for me, and this way I can just use it in the label. And I'm just going to make a group here. If I ever import it into other materials, I just find it's a good way of knowing, keeping your stuff straight. I'm going to set this to 0.5 for now. I have no idea what it's going to be later. And I'll make my ceiling 10. That should do us. And it's going to be a float 1. And that's the one we're going to use in this effects map, but we might as well make the other one now too. And we're going to call this magma speed. Again, I'm just going to copy it, paste it, and make a group. And I'll set the default here to 0.5 as well, where we'll probably change it later. And I'll make the ceiling 10. All right, so we're ready to get back into our effects map and take a look at what we're doing here. We're going to change the offset, size, and the rotation. So we're going to randomize all of these guys. If we take a look at the final material, I'm going to turn this all the way off. This crust speed, what it's really doing is animating the rotation. So it's each one of those things is turning round and round and round, and because they're overlapping each other, it gives the effect of the crust moving. The other two factors, the random placement and the random size, haven't been animated. So that kind of simplifies stuff. So we can come back here. So the offset, we're going to want a random float 2. So we have a different number for the x and for the y. So I'm making an empty function, and I'm going to edit my empty function, and let's start building our numbers out. So I want a constant. I'm going to look for the number 1 here, and I'm going to get a random node. Oops, function, random. And by doing this, I'm saying I want a random number between 0 and whatever this number is. It happens to be the number 1. And that's what I want as my result. We're dealing with a float 2, so we're going to need to vector these results into float 2. So I just did my x, and now I did my y. Now what's happening here is that my x and my y, they're going to be random, but they're both being exactly the same number here, and it's not what I want. I'm going to copy this, paste it, and now I'm going to have 2 completely different random numbers between 1 and 2, between 0 and 1, that are being vectored into my float 2. Again, if you change this number, you do change the randomization. For right now, we'll keep it to 1. Again, we can fool around with that later. That's pretty basic. We can come back out here, and we're going to do the same idea to the size. Again, it's going to require a float 2, our width and our height. We make an empty function and go in and edit our empty function. All right. There's a bunch of different ways to do this. Let's break it down. We know we want a random, so we're going to get a float. I'm going to use the number 1 here. I'm going to get a random function. And we know we're going to need to get a float 2 as a result, so we're going to create a float 2 using a vector float 2. So this is getting our random number between 0 and 1. And if we do this, we now have each one of these has been sized. They've been sized proportionately because whatever this random number is, it's the same for the x and the y. If you wanted to start stretching these things out, if you got a second random number here, just like we did with the other one, you now have sort of that, which I don't want. So I'm going to go back and just have it like that. Right. But these guys are, there's a lot of small ones in here. I don't really want small ones. I would like to sort of weed those out a little bit, and there's a whole bunch of different ways you can do this. This is where you start to do the aesthetics of what you want your actual stuff to look like. I'm going to just do the one that I picked, and there's no rules that says you have to do it like this. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a comparison function using an if-else statement. So I'm going to set up my condition here, which is going to get plugged in there. And then if the condition is met, this first thing happens. If the condition is not met, this thing happens. So let's set up our condition. Get another constant. So, all right. If the result of this random number is greater than 0.75, let's hook that up so we can see what we're doing. So if this is greater than 0.75, that's what I want to see. So that just immediately got rid of all the teeny weeny ones. And these two are the ones that are remaining that are actually meet this condition. And because we haven't put in an else statement yet, it's just gotten rid of the other ones. So now it's time to tell it what to do with the leftovers. You can get as creative as you want here. I'm just going to keep things simple. I'm not really worried about, we can have a couple of small ones. I just don't want there to be a lot of small ones. So I'm going to decrease the incidence of smaller islands or puddles, whatever we're going to call them. And I'm going to do that like this. If this number is smaller than 7.5, I want you to take that smaller number and I want you to add another random number between 0 and 1 to that number. So for example, if this, if this is just a little bit shy, it can very easily go over and become bigger than 1. And that's okay. I don't mind them going bigger. I just want less smaller ones. And now what it's done is it's gotten rid of most of the really teeny weeny ones. There's one little guy right here. And that's because I'm still relying on a random number to do that. So this was, so I ended up with a teeny weeny number here, and it happened, this particular one happened to have another teeny weeny number added to it here, which resulted in something that's still really teeny weeny and small. You can mess around with this one. You can say, okay, well, instead of doing a random number, if it's smaller than 0.75, I want you to add 0.25 to it. So this way it'll never be smaller than 1. They'll only be bigger than 1 or 1. So you can fool around with that. Actually, it should be 1, whatever, because again, if it's super small, you would probably want this number bigger. You can fool around with it. There's no rules. I ended up with this because I liked the result. So going back here, so that's our offset. We've got our size, that's our size. We've got our size, we've got our offset. Now we're now left with the one thing that we're actually going to put an animation on, which is our rotation. It's not complicated. We're going to make an empty function again. And we will, where are we? Rotation, and we're going to edit our empty function. Now we know we're going to have two variables, which is time and also the input variable that we created, which for this particular one is going to be our crust speed. So crust speed and time. And generally the way this thing works is if you want to get your time, you're going to multiply it by the crust speed. And this is going to determine the speed at which the animation happens. The next thing we want to do, though, is we do want, right now, these guys are all set up. They're all like little peas in a pod. They may be different sizes and they may be in different places, but they're all exactly the same rotation, and that absolutely does not work for me. So we are going to have to make a random function here. And we know how to do that. We've got a constant, and then we get a randomization. So remember, we want a number between, it's going to pick a number between 0 and whatever this number is. Honestly, I'm not sure if it deals with turns or degrees. It doesn't really matter. I'm going for degrees because it's the bigger number. If somebody actually wants to research that, they can. I wanted to pick a number between 0 and 360 because I wanted to have the ability to rotate fully around that axis. And if we set that up right now, even without, actually, we need to, rotation. No, this is the float 1 result. So we can just go ahead and set this as our output node. See, all of a sudden, those guys are, each one of them is now randomly rotated. So that already looks much better. The only problem is right now, it's not animating. So we can think of this as our start point. And all we really need to do is add this rotation speed onto our start point. And it's literally as simple as that. We get an addition node, and we add this to this, and we set it as our output node. And what we've just done here is we've added an animation to it. So I think this is probably a good time to come out here and export this out. I was looking at it before, so I already made an archive file. We want to play the SBSAR files in the player, just like or Unity or Unreal. It doesn't matter. I'm trying to keep this agnostic, but when you publish it out, this is what you're publishing it out as. And I'm going to go to my Substance player. And then we're just going to come in here and we're going to open. Oh, you know what we didn't do? I can open all the files I want. I don't think nope, we didn't hook it up. For now, I'm just going to hook it up to the base color so we could actually see what's going on with the results of this effects map. I'm going to just hit that so we can publish it out again. And take a look in our player and open that file. Lava 2. And there it is. So they're spinning around. Wow, they're spinning around really fast. So we're going to do, see right now it's set at 0.5. If we, right now it's 0, okay. I'm having to do like really, really sort of minute movements here. You know, honestly, it's a little uncomfortable. There's a really simple way to fix this so that your end user can actually go from like, make these bigger movements from 0 to 10, let's say, for example, by just putting what I would call like a factoring number into the actual function. So I think something, I mean, I wouldn't really want to see it go much faster than 0.049 here. So you know, like 0.1, I want to turn 10, I want to turn 0.1 into the number 10. So I'm actually going to have to slow down my animation. Let's get back into our rotation. I'm going to get another multiplication node. I'm going to get another constant. And, you know, we can mess around with this constant. But for now, I'm going to set it at 0.01. And then I'm going to, so I'm taking my crust speed. This is what the slider is dictating, right? So whatever the slider is dictating, before I even multiply it with the time, I'm just going to take that number and I'm going to multiply it by 0.01. And if I do that, I'm going to just refresh it here. Why isn't it refreshing? Oh, because I already slowed it down. That's right. Just showed you how to do it. But now, it makes it easier for people to kind of do bigger movements. So you're not constantly down here at the bottom and you've got all this on. I just find it's easier for the end user, I think, to do it like this. And you know, and you can fool around with those numbers. And if you want to go faster, you can either bring down, make this 0.1, or you can bring up the slider, you know, the amount people can do on the slider, the maximum on the slider. You know, just fool around with it. That's one way of kind of manipulating the the GUI, if you will, to make it a little bit easier for people to use. Right, so I'm not happy with my size, because if we look at this compared to the lava that we had before, and these are our magma areas, there's too much black area for my taste. I want a lot less crust and a lot more magma. So I'm going to go back here into my pattern size, and I'm going to see what happens if I bring this number up. Yeah. Oh, and let's not, but before we do that though, no, actually it is all of them now. Okay. Yeah, let's find something that we're happier with here, or you know what? Before we do that, let's set this back to 1. And let's play with this image a little bit more. What happens if we get into our vector graphic and we make it bigger? And I'm going into the original because it's going to affect all the other stuff going down the road. Now things are kind of sliding off here a little bit. We're going to bring this down. And I think I'm going to go down the line a little bit more here. That's as big as I want this. I think what I'm going to do here, I'm going to come in here and make these guys probably a little bit bigger. Am I moving the right one? Yeah, I think I'm kind of happy with that. I think I am going to do it at the effects map. So let's come back in here and come into our size and mess around with this. So I'm looking at the results of my 3D view here. And that's, now don't forget that this, what we're seeing like overlaying on stuff, we're going to fix it so that this is all just a completely black and white mask. So I'm looking at the shape of this black area. I'm not worried about this stuff because that's just going to be all one. It's going to be, will all be white. This will all be black. And I think the other thing, I'm going to make this bigger, but I think I also want to come back in here and, oh, I was doing this, sorry. I might want to also worry about the floor. I still want this random, so I'm going to just add another constant in here just to and let's call this, I don't know, 0.5. In fact, I'm gonna kind of look. I'm gonna bring this back down to 1. I think I'm gonna prefer doing this by leaving this alone and ramping the floor number up. I think that gives me more control. What I didn't like what was going on here, where I was getting like super duper big ones. I think by doing the floor, it's giving me a bit more control. I think because I'm looking at this shape. I rather like this black shape now. Maybe a little bit less of it. But, you know, like I said, it's there's a million different ways to do this, but I'm pretty happy with this result. So come back out here. And we now, let's run it one more time. I just want to see what this looks like when it's animated. But I think we're pretty much there. Yeah, that's starting to, you know, if you're imagining that this is all like one solid color, that's much, much, much better. This is starting to look like what we want it to look like. All right, and I think one more thing we're going to do on this video before we stop, we'll go ahead and make that whole black and white thing happen and create this mask. So I just put a levels node in there, and I'm just going to, you know, kill all the grays. Let's get those whites nice and white. Oh, I always do that. And we're going to find a spot where we like the edges, and then we're going to sort of try to get those edges completely white. And now this becomes, well, you know, it might be interesting. Let's leave a little bit. If we do this little bit here, this is going to be affecting our color mask. So if we go back to the original material that I made, the those bits and pieces are good. You see how you've got like a little bit of shadowing of that sort of crusty stuff happening? That's what's going on in here. So this is what you're determining in here. So that looks pretty good. All right, we'll leave the video here and we'll pick it up in the next one.